Hey everybody, before we get started, I just want to remind you this episode is brought to you by patrons like Ahega Comics, Qua, Jeremy Vasquez, Kylie Denton, Nestor Flores, Sodasan0424, and VideoGamer75. If you like what we do and want to see us do more, consider supporting us on Patreon. You can get access to episodes early and lots of other goodies, and it really helps us out. Thanks for your support, everybody. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. It is time, once again, to talk about Legend of the Five Rings, the role-playing game by Fantasy Flight Games. That's right, it's time for another one of my book club reviews. Still an actual book club. That's right, after literally months. When did it come out? Was it late? I'm pretty sure it was late June. It was like the end of June, and now it's August. It's the end of August. Anyway, the Courts of Stone PDF has finally dropped, which means that literally 5 seconds after I found out, despite the fact that there was no real fanfare from Drive-Thru or Fantasy Flight, it was still featured on Drive-Thru RPG's front page, so if you haven't seen it, go ahead and look at that. But about 5 seconds after I got that news, FFG got my $20, and that process will continue for PDF releases. But anyway, it finally came out. Took them forever. No idea what on earth that was that delayed it, but I immediately read it cover to cover. I can still say that even if it's digital. They're digital covers. And so I'm super excited to bring you this video where we talk about it. So, I don't know, it's been forever since I did one of these, so I don't remember my exact format for... like if I had any particular way I discussed the contents, but I'm just going to kind of review this stuff. If you still haven't picked it up, for instance, or you just want somebody else's opinion on it, I know the hardback's been out for months, so plenty of people probably could have picked it up if they wanted. But anyway, we'll still talk about it. I'll review it. I'll give you kind of my opinions and stuff, talk about some other stuff, and move on with the news. I will say, though, the book was a great boon. I stopped writing my own L5R campaign around this point. I don't want to spoil where exactly I was set, but there were some themes and stuff interacting with some of the things in this book, and so I was like, I don't really want to do a whole bunch of research or, worse, do original legwork only for this book about the themes I'm about to talk about to come out and then be better, or I have to change something because it's not necessarily true, and I don't want to, like, confuse my players or anything. Because, you know, that's always a thing you have to do as a GM, is be like, okay, so, I've done this with Star Wars before, for instance. Okay, so we have to talk about, we're about here, but we're not here yet, and this hasn't happened, and blah, blah, blah. So, like, I want to try and avoid some of that, so I waited, and the moment I started reading this book, it was like, boom, bam! I was like, boom, ideas! Idea over here, plot hook here. Oh, this location works really well for a thing I was going to do later that I hadn't gotten to yet. It was great. It's a great read. It's a really great read. First of all, like, I've said this, I think, about every source book so far, but no, it's a really informative read, so let's break it down by the chapters and talk about the segments, and kind of what you get out of this book, if you were still on the fence about whether or not you want to pick it up. So, the first chapter is Imperial Strongholds, and this is basically broken into two halves, a bit like Shadowlands. Sorry, I'm a little nasally for some reason. Hold on, I'm gonna blow my nose off mic and then try this again. Sorry, don't know why I had such a trouble breathing there. Anyway, part 1, or chapter 1, Imperial Strongholds. Two halves, a bit like Shadowlands. The first half focuses on castles in Rokugan. Now, some of this reiterates a little bit of the stuff that was already covered in the sections on castles in Emerald Empire, but it also goes a little bit more in depth, because it's very centrally focused on castles, not necessarily, like, broadly talking about all kinds of stuff. So it discusses the roles of castles and kind of talks about, you know, the military, political, and economic functions of a castle, how it can be all of those. It goes a little bit deeper on the actual structures and talks about different and new terminology, like talking about the specific names for the foundation, the layout, gatehouses, courtyards, stuff like that. It talks a lot about the different aspects of the castle, like I said. So, for instance... there's a section called Castles as Fortresses, so that actually talks about the military stuff. It's not an in-depth look at siege warfare, but it does actually discuss the concept of how castles are defensible, you know, so some of your walls, all of your walls usually have a level of an angle, because that's their artistic style with the facade, so, like, very steep angles make it hard for them to hike, and that's explicitly called out as the primary way that invaders will attack a castle, is they will literally try and climb up the walls. It talks about, you know, arrow holes and stuff where you drop slots where you drop things on them. Boiling oil, burning sand, the usual stuff. Even whole logs, if you can. It also talks about sapping attacks and how engineers, when they build the foundations, usually your castle is built on a pre-laid foundation, which are not mortared, so they have drainage, and stuff like that. It also talks about, gatehouses and stuff like that. It doesn't really mention siege engines. Still, that's mostly a crab thing, and just that's not in the nature, of a castle in Rokugan. They do siege, but they don't necessarily try and knock down the walls, other than maybe sapping attacks. So, yeah, there's plenty of fluff on that if you ever were wondering about castle assaults. I'm hopeful that a future Lion book will talk a little bit more about that when talking about how war goes about. Well, there's a lot of stuff. There's yet another name drop of the Nightingale Floor. That's a concept they seem to be running with. And so then they talk about the people who live in castles, the castle as a, political center, all the different things that go in there. Talking about how, castles are not static, they're mutable. Interior decoration or even exterior decorations will be changed to, welcome different people. It talks a little bit about castle towns. There's a very handy chart, a very table, Table 1-1, Castle Staff Roles, which I immediately found helpful to me as a GM, because it was okay, so here's the name of several positions. Here's what they do, basically, what their responsibilities are, and here's their status level, which I was oh my god, I needed this. So, the head of the estate is a 59. The Karo, the Senshal, is about a 50. Hatamoto is kind of the personal retainers, who handle specific areas. They're advisors. So their status, 40. And then they're commissioner, the Bugyo, which is a sub-Hatamoto kind of position, a medium-level administrator, which was a new term. And then just the generic Hikan, the actual nobles of the castle who respond to various commissioners, who have average status levels. So yeah, this is super important for, world building, tracking everybody, making sure everybody's got roughly the right amount of status level, for everything. It also talks about the concept of Winter Court, some various little aspects here and there about it, what goes on, the Imperial Winter Court and stuff, but just kind of sets up the concept, is very big in L5R. And then the rest of this half of the chapter is all devoted to sample castles, most of which are pretty in-depth. We're talking, some of these are, 3 or 4 pages, and they all have different little aspects. They talk about strengths and weaknesses of the castle, the culture of the castle, why people go there, which I think is a really good add-on, and then supernatural phenomena, because, the mystic is alive and well. This includes not only big names like Last Breath Castle, Shiromatsu, but also Kyuden Hida, Shirokitsuki is pretty interesting, that's a pretty big one. Kyuden Asako is on there. Kyuden Doji, of course. But there's also smaller places like Shirokandai, which is a castle on a port city in Crane Lands, and the Crane's Sevenfold Palace, which is, this kind of artistic focus for artisans and craftsmen. There's also Kyuden Shika, the palace of the Deer Clan, a new minor clan that is introduced in the book. We'll talk more about them later, because they actually get a full write-up in the second chapter, but we'll get there. That said, I really like the description of Kyuden Shika. It's this place that's hidden away in these sleepy, slightly supernatural woods, and they're it's a little bit this is another concept I really liked, was they talked about Kyuden Asako as kind of a resort in the Rokugani way location. They have lots of hot springs, they do a lot of medicinal work, massages, therapy, healing. There's a lot of literature and reading there if you want to get done. It's a good place to kind of get away from things, relax, and have a kind of a quiet social situation, as opposed to Kyuden Doji, which is kind of it's very artistic and beautiful and aesthetic, but it's also very formal. So it's kind of you don't go to Kyuden Doji to relax unless maybe you're a doji courtier or a Kakita, because the Kakita get to relax anywhere because that's their shtick. But yeah, so Kyuden Shika then is kind of the Chinese bootleg of Kyuden Asako. It's a little bit more racy, a little bit more sensational, seductive, and it's a place you go as a young samurai to have a good time, but also maybe the Deer Clan might learn some stuff about you, and maybe they'll be happy and they'll just set you up on a date, or maybe they'll secretly record this information so they can use it later. We'll talk more about the Deer Clan when we talk about Chapter 2. The second half of this chapter is then entirely about the Crane clan. It talks about kind of their formation and their history. It discusses Lady Doji and how she kind of came together. It changes a little bit of how the Crane were portrayed previously. In previous lore, the emphasis was that, Lady Doji created the entire culture of Rokugan whole cloth, which was kind of dumb. Like, I get you that she's a goddess, and obviously she has a lot of creativity, but at the same time, it doesn't feel, true to life, right? Because it doesn't explain lots of things. But in this case, it's more like she curated culture. She found the arts, she found the language, she developed the writing system out of that language as kind of a way to share her words. So she did invent some aspects, but a lot of it she kind of picked the parts she liked best and synthesized them into a singular culture and then said, okay, I'm Lady Doji, and this is my clan, the Crane clan, and we've picked the culture. There's a sidebar that's really cool. The Cost of Grace. It talks about a scholarly work that kind of criticized Lady Doji and the Crane clan for how they basically eliminated cultures. Like, Akodo eliminated peoples physically. He, killed the shit out of some people. Genocided the Kitsu. The spirit people, not the family. That's why the Kitsu family exists. Save that discussion for a Lion Clan book. But the way that, say, the Crane kind of, collated all this knowledge and then just discarded languages, art forms, oral history, I'm sure, kind of, completely destroyed knowledge and even beauty in the world, which is kind of interesting. So it emphasizes a lot of what the Crane clan's role is in their origins, but also a lot of their ethos. Yes, the Crane can kind of do have a certain amount of military might. The Daidoji you're mentioned later talks about their land and their families. They're very strong and good about making, there's a phrase, but I don't remember right off the top of my head. I won't struggle on it too long, but they're good at making do with less. As far as soldiers go and so on, but their true way that they win is culturally and politically. They make their enemies into friends, and they get their friends to take care of their enemies, kind of thing. And then it talks about the families. We get a breakdown of the Doji family. Talks about their school, speaking without words. A lot of their stuff has the story of Yasurugi and Konishiko kind of stuff, family traditions and things. We get some name drops of some future schools. Because while they do talk about the Doji Bureaucrat School, which is in this, and we'll mention all the schools when we talk about Chapter 2, it does also mention the Doji Rhetorician with a capital R, so that's obviously a school they may do later. And also the Inner Court Guard, who are Doji-trained Bushi and courtiers who appear to be the old Empress Guard, which was a thing, I think it was invented for the Clan War, so that the Clan War miniatures game, so that everybody could have more unique units. But they're called the Inner Court Guard, and they are responsible for protecting the spouse of the Emperor, the Imperial spouse, who is usually a Doji. So that's kind of cool that kind of lurks up in there. We talk about the Kakita family. There's some great quotes from the Sword, which I will show to any future Kakita players. They also kind of explain enmity between us, the reason why Matsu and Kakita family don't get on. Talks a lot about the Kakita style of kind of perfection. There's a lot of talk, for instance, about how even individual families of the Crane kind of value certain tenets of Bushido even more than the default ones. Like, Kakita venerate courage almost as much as they do courtesy kind of stuff. It also mentions them as the Crane's troublemakers. It explicitly calls them out as basically the Crane version of an assassin. Like, there is a Shinobi Crane school in this book. They are not assassins. They are intelligence gatherers, espionage experts, spy masters, literally. No, if the Crane want to arrange somebody to die and make it look like an accident, they have a Kakita challenge them to a duel, and oops, I accidentally all of his blood. That's explicitly called out here. So lots of fun stuff. They do talk about Kakita artisans, though. They talk about the love story between Doji and Kakita. We talk about the Daidoji, their unusual kind of origin, a lot of their traditions and how they handle things. Their tradition of dyeing their hair, how they conduct warfare. You'll notice that the Harriers are not mentioned anywhere in this section. In fact, a huge effort is placed on mentioning how the Daidoji are, in fact, super honorable. Like, they do their utmost to maintain the principles of Bushido and also do their work. Like, they don't stab you in the back, they don't attack you in the night, they don't do anything nasty like... The Iron Warriors don't do anything nasty like that, but they will totally follow you for days, and so when they choose to strike, they will strike at the most advantageous moment. And, Akoto himself said, warfare is deception, Tactics is not dishonor. So, like, I thought of a good metaphor for it. A Daidoji won't sneak up behind you and stab you in the back, but he will wait out of sight behind a tree until you approach, and he will jump out from behind that tree and stab you in the front. And you can't say shit about it. If you failed to react fast enough, well, that was your problem. There is a sidebar which kind of alludes to the Harriers, talking about Daidoji Uji and how he kind of quietly orchestrates certain things without letting the greater Daidoji family know that maybe some members are not acting perfectly honorably. But it's still very underplayed. It's like a subtle thing that's not thrown out into the open. And then lastly, they talk about the Asahina, talks about their kind of origins. There's some mention of Asahina Yajinden and kind of how stuff went wrong for him. The blood swords are not named, but they are alluded to, and lots of other things. Also, this is another weird thing, like, I shared this segment with some people, and they were all like, oh, blood swords! But I was like, okay, but what about the unfinished sword? It explicitly calls out that, at least according to the fables the Asahina recorded, he was working on a final sword which would undo all of the evil his other crafts would accidentally do. His Sangusuri. Which, by the way, are mentioned. They talk about how the Asahina go about making their talismans and stuff. I don't know, because the mastery ability for the school kind of gets into that, but I don't know if we'll have a future. I guess you could just argue that that's preparing invocations with, like, design or something. But anyway, yeah, but Yajinden basically was supposedly working on a final sword that would set right what went wrong, and it was unfinished and is sealed away. And I'm like, is that some kind of Sword of Evil's Bane? I don't know. And then after all the little family highlights, it talks about the Crane Land and kind of outlines the rough area of them, then it goes into certain specific details. Talks about, like, Shizuka-toshi, Eye of the Needle, River of the Blind Monk, Tangled Path Village, Daughter Village. Then it kind of talks about how one goes around kind of doing courtly stuff, which is theoretically open-ended, but definitely does feel more crane-facing, because that's kind of their expertise. So it talks about Masters of Court, the Emperor's Blessing, favors, so it talks about favors and gift-giving, gatekeeping, cultural influence. This is where the sidebar for duels at court is, which is the crane-style dueling, which eliminates some of the problems some people have had with the way Iaijutsu duels are normally framed, because it's like, you cannot do strikes with other weapons, you can only wear ceremonial robes, blah, blah, blah. You can't speak discourteously, so, like, certain forms of taunt techniques and other stuff are not allowed. And multiple strikes will reduce your score. So you can't just wail on a guy. You will lose points, and it's entirely possible that you will be judged to have lost even if you win. They also talk about an interesting rule, which is appeal for judgment. That's one of the victory conditions. So basically, when someone is incapacitated, the opponent can make an appeal to one of the judge that, if they do, the duel ends immediately and is scored. So you could drop a hit on a guy, like with an Iaijutsu cut, and incapacitate him but not crit him, and basically be like, this guy's clearly too tired to continue, he has to stop. And if you pass the check, you can get the judges to basically rule for you, which is another, like, little patch, which is good. I hope we get more in-depth detail about other dueling formats, but this is still pretty good to, like, give people expanded rules on how Iaijutsu works, kind of, like, in a certain very regimented fashion, which was something several newer readers did not get out of the core book description of dueling as kind of an open format. And then there's also Shadows of Court, so it talks about espionage. And mostly eavesdropping type espionage. The game of letters is also kind of discussed, and how letter writing and countermeasures work. meetings and all that stuff. And then we move into the second chapter. So the second chapter is Wars of Words and Shadows. So first off, there is quite a lengthy section on the Deer Clan. So I'm gonna start off here, and I'm gonna be like, okay, guys. So I figured this out based from just my experience with FFG marketing, but a lot of people were super concerned when the Deer Clan were announced that, like, oh man, this is a minor clan who's like, oh, they got like divine prophecy and they manipulate fate and they're, controlling Rokugan from behind the scene. No, that's all just marketing BS. Like, they want the Deer Clan to sound cool, so you buy the book. I've seen this very often with miniatures games and stuff. No, they're upselling the product. The Deer Clan are much more balanced. You could almost make a meme about balancing than that. But also, when a lot of old 5R nerds got this book, they seemed to report that the Deer Clan were somehow disappointed to them. Oh, this is just some writer's pet project. It doesn't add anything new to the setting. It steps on other people's toes and stuff. And I want to be like, dude, okay, hold up. First off, you're wrong. Like, I don't know what blinded you to the fact of the text that's on the screen, but you're wrong. There are literally new concepts in this section about the deer, but we'll get to that in a second. But second of all, y'all's favorite minor clans were once some specific RPG writers or fiction writer, even. Because, sometimes minor clans are factions to the card game, which seems weird. But anyway, we're not talking about the CCG. But that was some writer's pet project OC Snowflake Donut Steel. Okay? That's where they started too. So don't be throwing stones, guys. Just because some of your ideas have taken off and got a history, or, as many critics of the Mantis might say, were completely stripped of their themes and ideas and borged into the Mantis. What was that? Sorry. Nothing happened. But yeah, like, just because some of your minor clans got a chance to develop past being a footnote about the clan that does the thing, okay, don't be harsh browning on new content. I'll be here to check your RPG privilege. But yeah, so I actually kind of like the Deer Clan. They're kind of interesting. I might try playing a Spirit Dancer sometime if I ever got to play. They have a pretty typical minor clan origin. They are descended from eloping members of the Crane, so elopement is a pretty common reason for samurai to basically be forsaken or have to start their own kind of holding. So they functionally start like a Ronin Brotherhood after they discover a mysterious connection to, let me make sure I get the name right. Yeah, Musubi, the Fortune of Bonds, who is typical by theologians considered to have, like, be responsible for marriages and contracts, but in this case, the Deer Clan they kind of got a message from Musubi, so they've got a certain different interpretation that Musubi is the fortune of the bonds that kind of tie everything together. And it could just be this is their own weird interpretation that's not correct. But anyway, so that's kind of their origin, is like they started as kind of like a Ronin outfit from another great clan that forked off, and then they had a special power, and then after they influenced an imperial court, like they were able to kind of ward off some omens. They were ascended to minor clan status and basically got to officially keep the Aokami Forest, which is where they live. So when you want to talk about original concepts, so first off, I find this very interesting, but they do stuff that I haven't really seen brought up before. They talk about meridians and kind of this bond method. They have the Musubu technique, which is kind of like how ties that bind, the ritual we'll talk about later, works. But it links lots of meridians to, like, different elements and different aspects of the body that extend out and kind of link to people or things concerning you as kind of like a, not really a fortune-telling, but I guess a general augury kind of figure stuff out about the world sense. Which, like I said, I have not necessarily heard this mentioned anywhere else, and it's a really interesting concept that I like a lot. This kind of like, different parts of the body connected to this stuff. Water meridian right extends from your right hand to friends and loved ones. Water meridian left extends from your left hands to enemies and rivals, that kind of stuff. That's kind of cool. And also, the deer have kind of an interesting personal philosophy about their idea of balance is not like, it is about balance of power, but it's not necessarily about, like, cosmic balance or karmic balance, and it's not about, like, oh, we need to... It's not like, a lot of people were like, aren't they just the Otomo? because the Otomo kind of have a informal role that they picked up later to keep the Great Clan specifically competing so that they can't ever overcome the Chrysanthemum Throne again after the whole Gozoku thing. The Deer's version of balance isn't really like that. They're kind of more... It actually kind of reminds me of some of the stuff they talk about with Asahina, where they talk about, every person and every kami has good and bad aspects. So the Deer philosophy, and that makes sense because they're actually partially descended from an Asahina. The Deer philosophy is like, enlightenment isn't necessarily the path, right? You don't want to stagnate. If a world became completely good or completely evil, it would be the same as if there was no good and evil at all. Right? Like, forces of order and disorder naturally oppose our good natures and our dark natures, kind of like are constantly circulating, and ideally things are like the sun and the moon. They're in an eternal balance that kind of cycles back and forth. So that's their idea of balance, which is, once again, kind of interesting. It's different than a lot of the generic Enlightenment philosophy that I think some other clans have, right? So they operate with a different philosophy than some of these other clans do, trying to find this kind of like spiritual balance. And they know that like positives and negatives kind of balance each other out. Ideally, like if you have a rivalry with someone, you can grow from that, you can learn from that, which is literally explained by the bond system. And also they think that flaws are kind of important, right? Like you should not downplay or suppress your negatives because that puts you out of balance. You should like accept those parts of yourself. So, for instance, spear dancers, their bushi type, are they're very stoic and very neutral outside of their lands, but they're remarkably like emotionally free and open inside the forest and around Kyuden. That's kind of a thing. Like they just kind of hang out and relax when they're at home, but when they go outside, they're like businesslike. Their matchmakers are supposed to, because they're kind of tasked with like manipulating other people, they're not supposed to like form close attachments with outsiders, but close attachments with people in the clan are kind of encouraged. And because the Deer were founded by a love match, they, an elopement, they personally don't, like, within the Deer clan, they don't like arrange any marriages or anything. They completely marry for love and stuff. Ideally, like there are some political realities, but that's kind of their thing. Now, interestingly enough, this story does make them a little bit similar to the Dragonfly clan, but that's not really brought up. And I'm sure, given the wealth of backstory on a lot of these ideas, and kind of how and why, because while the tropes are similar, the philosophies and the reasons behind stuff are very different. The Deer do really seem strongly shaped by their connection to Musubi and by kind of the families they grew out of, which was Daidoji and Asahina coming together. So they're kind of different, and it does kind of actually talk about their relationships with other clans, kind of stuff. Which, interestingly, the one group that it calls out they are similar to is actually the Phoenix, and this means that they don't get along because they're too alike in some ways, but not alike in others. So, like, the Phoenix don't like that these guys have this weird devotion to a specific fortune, or that they won't give the Phoenix access to all their records, because the Phoenix are like, but we the Phoenix, we get all our knowledge. And the Deer are like, the Deer are more concerned that, like, the Phoenix aren't actually doing their job to preserve harmony, because there's stuff like the elemental imbalance and the perfect land sect going on. So they're like, are these guys actually doing their jobs kind of stuff? Like, we're spiritually aware, man. You can't hoodwink us. But it also kind of notes that, like, the clans you'd expect them to be weak against, they kind of are. Like, while they are kind of friendly with the Crane, at the same time, they're also adepts at court, so they don't really fall for, like, the Deer's bullshit, right? Like, there's a Deer proverb, a deer bows lowest before it charges, so that's kind of like part of their philosophy. Members of the Deer clan appear eccentric, emotional, they're kind of weird, but their advice is good. It mentions that lots of clans think that they need patience because, like, you'll get some good advice out of a Sheikah eventually. They gotta, like, work through some of their weirdness first. And the Scorpion are kind of, like, too good at this because they don't have to pretend that they're not sneaky assholes. So they will just sneaky asshole you. That said, there's a great quote about the clan of Bayushi in the deer section, which I love, where how strength has always been their weakness and weakness is their strength. So kind of like the more out in the open and the more openly powerful they are and exposed, the worse off their actual position is, but all being underestimated and kind of like looking like they're weak is when they're their strongest. I love that. That encapsulates the Scorpion flavor so much. Though also there's a fun aspect. If you're a crab, you may be surprised to find out that the deer, because of the way of the festering pit of Fuleng and stuff, is basically like a permanent imbalance. The deer are always supportive of the crab, and they will like quietly deal with bandits and other attackers who are like picking on crab supplies and stuff. It's pretty funny. But yeah, basically the deer aren't as big and scary as people thought they were, but also I feel like a lot of people are just like, they were too, I don't know what the word is, too in their own heads, too predisposed. They did not, as I like to constantly say, see with eyes unclouded. You gotta let go of your preconceptions, kids. Look at everything with fresh eyes, which I do a lot with the lore, because that's why I didn't get into L5R until this edition, because I was like, man, there's a lot of backstory and bullshit here that I don't know what to do with. So I'll just think that L5R is cool, and maybe I'll play it someday. And that's the front half of the second chapter. So the rest of the chapter is basically all new mechanic stuff. There's the actual rules for Deer Clan characters, there's all the new schools. I'll list them out as we go through, but I won't talk about them in too much depth. I have a show for that. By the way, if you're wondering, I do have all the notes and stuff for another Enter the Dojo. We're going to do Togashi Monks, but I didn't shoot that because I'm shooting this today instead, because this, I feel, is a bigger deal. So we have, speaking of the clan of Bayushi, we have the Bayushi Death Dealer School. Scorpion finally have a Bushi tagged school, but it's also tagged Shinobi, like all their friggin' schools. And honestly, I think this was a good idea because it gives them, they get access to new techniques and new equipment. So they have very interesting abilities, but they also have a very broad spread of new techniques, which kind of like encapsulate their thing. And the Bayushi philosophy to always be underestimated and to use any tool at your disposal kind of thing. So it's a very cool school. I mentioned them before. There's a Daidoji Spymaster School, which is a courtier shinobi. They are spymasters and intelligence gatherers. They are not like ninja assassins with smoke bombs. But still, they get a couple of interesting abilities. They get access to a couple of the new shujis and ninjutsu. They focus mostly on social stuff, but they can do a little bit of skulking and spying. There's also the Doji Bureaucrat School, which is very interesting. They only get rituals and shuji. They do not get kata at all. But they have some pretty nasty school abilities, and they also have a item which designates them as an authority. So looking at it's very interesting. I think because they talk about the Imperial Court a lot. I think this school is meant to be kind of like compatible with certain Imperial type games. Like, that's another thing that people have talked about is like, oh, you can't use Imperial family options all the time. And I kind of agree, you can't because of the way the fiction works. But also, the Imperial families by default have more status. So this school kind of works for a more social or court-focused game to kind of be like, here's a school member that even if they're at their low rank will theoretically be of certain amounts of authority and can be on those stages. It's a very interesting concept, and I wonder if we'll see more stuff like this. There is an Akoma Shadow School. They are a little bit more martial, as befitting the lion, but still, they are mostly shinobi and stuff focused. They have some interesting abilities to like do rerolls and risk honor, but are also still more and more that espionage focused. There's the very interesting new Mercenary Ninja training, not really a school, but training, which gives you blanket ninjutsu access to kind of like model your generic sort of ninja type. So first of all, this is a I think Ronin compatible shinobi school, as it were, but also it gives you that kind of like freelance spy or shinobi kind of feel. There's a Shiba Artisan School, which is kind of interesting. The artistic focus is interesting, but there are several artistry type abilities in this. There's the two Sheikah schools. The Sheikah Matchmaker is a courtier Shugenja. They only get air and water. But they also get their core ability is they get the Ritual of the Ties that bind really early, and also they do it better. So they're like laser focused on that mechanic, and they have a few interesting invocations and kind of social abilities. Also, there's a sidebar in matchmaking that's like, so just because they're called the matchmakers, they're not literally the only matchmakers. Just like the Akodo aren't literally the only commanders. I think the Yasuki Jimbo school, which is later in this, is literally not the only Jimbo. You know, that sort of stuff. Then their Spear Dancers are a Bushi Shinobi school, so they're they're okay at like taking a life in Shinobi sort of stuff, but mostly they're good about like certain spear techniques and kind of like attacking randomly, kind of taking advantage of terrain. So the very confusing Togashi Chronicler school is a courtier monk, but like when I saw the preview of this, I was so perplexed. Their ability is that when you make a social check, you can do a Kiho, whether or not you know it, you can do a Kiho enhancement, not the burst effect, for a scene to like subtly gain their enhancement abilities, and so on and so forth. And you can even, at their mastery ability, do it to multiple people. And they've got stuff like the Great Silence, you know, though weirdly enough, they get Breaking Blow and Death Touch. Like I said, this school is conceptually interesting, but at the same time, I don't really get the fluff rating. It's like, it's related to how the Dragon Clan are supposedly supposed to be keeping care of the history of Rokugan for context, which I think I've talked about before. And, like, it makes sense for them to be these, like, wandering storytellers, but, like, why are they courtier? Like personally, I would have said that it would make more sense if the school was either, like, fully fluffed as, like, a storytelling type thing or a historian, or if it was fully fluffed like, yo, before the Kitsuki existed. The way Togashi, the Dragon Clan, handled negotiation was a very nice monk man showed up at your doorstep one day and talked to you about some stuff you need to do. And if you didn't do it, angry two-sword men would show up at your door the next day, kind of thing. But yeah, it's, like I said, it really seems kind of weird and very ephemeral kind of stuff the way it's handled, but whatever. The concept of, like, you know, collective unconsciousness and patterns of storytelling is cool and all. It's just, like I said, it's weird. And I mentioned that there's a Yasuki Yojimbo school, which is cool. There's an actual, like, full-blown Yasuki-trained Bushi school who are kind of, like, Spear Yojimbo, which is really cool. I like them a lot. There's some new advantages and disadvantages, the usual stuff. There's a new Fame one, though, famously neutral. There's the best passion ever, Pot Stirrer, which I love the quote for. The fluff quote is just, I don't care what anyone else says about you, Kakita-san. I respect you. Which is just like, ooh. There's a new adversity, which is very general, which I think is good, but also it's kind of funny. There's overconfidence in feature, where you have an overconfidence in something like your charm, your creativity, your toughness, whatever. There's also a lackluster adversity. So these are good. These are much more like social and creative based, which will help people, because there are a lot of Scar disadvantages in the core book to facilitate the critical system, so this like gives you more stuff. There's a new heritage table, and then there's a bunch of new gear and items. There's new courtly items, balls, makeup kits, a regular folding fan, not a killing people fan, palanquins, the Taboo Plaque, which is kind of like a little good luck charm to keep bad juju away, which is, I think it's a cheap. The rarity I think is the same, but the cost is less. It's about as kind of like a cheaper Finger of Jade. But there's the question that a Taboo Plaque might be improperly made and not do anything. There's the ceremonial tea set, which is like a really fancy tea set. Then there are Shinobi items. So there's straw hats, bamboo canes, demon masks, which are really interesting. Herbal medicine pills, invisible ink. There's caltrops. There's Mitsubushi, the like eggshell or whatever, smoke bombs, water spiders, lockpick tools, rope ladder. There's the Sekihitsu, which is a special pencil. It's a sharpened pencil of like soapstone or graphite or something. So it lets you write messages or whatever. But also you can use it to stab if you need to, which is funny. There's the incense box thing, and there's lighters, which are super fun. Then there's these new weapons, which I like. So there's a ninjato, which I know some people will be like, oh, that's not historically accurate, but neither is Rokugan. I know some people get really mad about the Rokugan is not Japan, but it's really not. That's the thing. Like, a lot of the cultural aspects and terminology are heavily influenced, but it's not meant to be a one-for-one historical Japan. Because I'm pretty sure historical Japan didn't have guys talking to the kami and summoning lightning bolts and fireballs and stuff. Or, cleaving the earth in twain with your sword or whatever. Stabbing ghosts. That kind of stuff. So, but yeah, there's a ninjato, which is kind of like explained as it's meant to be kind of like a disposable, mass-produced katana. It's straight. It's not folded or anything fancy. It's slightly smaller and easier to draw, but it's less durable and not as good a weapon. But it also mentions that since everybody knows shinobi carry ninjato, that they're kind of obvious. So this is something I really like. It mentions that the Scorpion have developed a weapon that's written with the same characters, but it's pronounced Shinobi Katana, which is another name for something that's kind of like similar, but it's basically the same joke kind of thing, like a reference. But it's got a slightly shorter length blade than its sheath, so it can be done for a quick draw, and has a certain amount of deception, but also has a slight disadvantage in an open fight too still. But yeah, it's fun. I like it a lot. And it kind of encapsulates something that I think is important, which is to show that tech doesn't stagnate. There's also a folding half bow. There's a bunch of chain weapons. There's the shakuhachi, the flute, which also can be improvised to punch people. Takagi claws and Tekken iron fists. There's some new armors and stuff. Firefighter's coat, stealth clothing. Oh yeah. I should all mention there's the kamayari, the hooked spear. It mentions in the Deer Clan section that they have a tsunoyari or tsunogari, which is kind of like which I think would literally, because tsuno is like horn, so it's like an antler spear, but it's not statted. That's kind of a shame because it sounded interesting and unique. But yeah, that's most of the stuff, and then it goes through all the new techniques. You can trip the leg. You can do pole vault. So there's 2 new kata, for instance, which are both spear focused. There's a bunch of new ninjutsu, which range from like making. I love Deceitful Strike. You can spend opportunity to make it look like when you killed somebody in a duel, it was an accident. Slicing wind kick, silent elimination, lots of fun stuff. There are some new rituals. We have our first rank 5 ritual, the formal tea ceremony, which is like the regular tea ceremony, but bigger. You remove 6 strife plus bonus successes. Also, note it says even if you don't succeed, I think they remove 6 strife, because it says if you succeed, they also gain a void point. So you do better strife removal if you succeed, but you don't have to. And then there's some extra stuff. There's treaty signing, which is a really interesting rank 2 ritual, which lets you basically stake honor to like build an agreement. Ties that bind also mentioned that can let you learn things about relationships and also make it easier to spend bonds. There's a whole bunch of new shuji, which I like. Assess strength, hidden in smoke, unyielding terms. All shall fear me is a good one. Crackling laughter, which lets you strafe out people. Offend the sensibility. Spiteful loss. There's a lot of game stuff in here, which is funny. If you lose a game with spiteful loss, you can spend an opportunity to like inflict strife on people. There's also a rank 1 water shuji called Fun and Games, which lets you de-stress people, which is hilarious. And then, so Chapter 3 is called Games of Discourse. This is all the GM stuff. So it talks about running the Winter Court game, which is a big idea. It talks a lot about setting your expectation with players, figuring out cultural knowledge. A lot of notes that, on the one hand, arguably could be in the core book, but also I'm okay that they didn't necessarily include them yet, because it's like, when you get the core book, you don't necessarily know what type of game you're going to run, but this is a supplement that's hard focused on social and intrigue type stuff. So this is like important to be like, hey, we should make sure to talk about like, this is a good point to introduce notes about, okay, if you're running political or intrigue heavy games, players may not be as skilled at that sort of stuff, so there's plenty of opportunity to let them do things. Maybe players don't know the Rokugani culture, how to prepare for stuff, do details. Talks a little bit about romance and things. Like if you were running like a romantic game. Talks a little bit about, being not a dick to your players, which is something FFG has been consistently good at with this. It has a couple of notes about running games for Shinobi, like how to handle letting them be themselves, how to do like different missions and stuff. Just a couple pages on advice. It also lists the new titles, of which there are lots. There's like Castellan, Covert Agent. Dreaded Enforcer is a fun one. Dreaded Enforcer and Covert Agent are good ways to get ninjutsu out of your school. Esteemed Negotiator also. So this kind of like a lot of people were like, why isn't there a generic Nakoto title? The Esteemed Negotiator is kind of like that, but it's broader than that. It's any kind of mediator, negotiator, or counselor. So that's kind of like you can come together and get this position to mediate things. There's a Kenshinzen title, which is really cool. It lets you spend Void Opportunity when you're attacking with a sheathed weapon to be like, unless they spend a Void Point, they can't defend the damage. So it's like, whoops, you're going to take a blow. You're going to take a crit for free. And then if you have it again, you could resheath. When mentioning about Kyuden Asako, it talked about their shield bearers, who have kind of like a prehistoric martial arts tradition, which is really cool. So it has their kind of rules if you want to do that. And there's some Master Artisan stuff. Winter Court Champion and the Sevenfold Palace. There's some new opportunity tables. One of which is for romance, which is fun because you can like meet cute, you can like do lots of stuff. It's a good curious thing. It talks. There is much like the Crab Clan section. There's a discussion about the section of courtesy. So like how to handle your courtesy as a rule. So like etiquette and stuff, gossips and rumor, emotional outbursts, some new small breaches and sacrifices for courtesy, and then it has a new mechanics bonds. So some people are kind of, some people are down on bonds. I like them a lot, but that's mostly just because I like their descriptive stuff. So there's like 5 types of bonds. You spend EXP to open a bond, or if you're using bond, you can start with like a bond at level 1 kind of stuff. You can spend the EXP if you're doing it between PCs. They both have to spend it, though. If you do the Ties That Bind ritual, you can reduce that at cost a lot. And so you have these kind of new abilities which give you new narrative stuff, and I think it's super fun. I would definitely encourage players to do this. Like, Strong Roots Grow Deep is the family ability. Could treat your composure increased by your bond rank when you think of your family kind of stuff. And some of these are positive. You have family, comrades, lovers, but you also have rivals and nemesis, which is really great. The nemesis ability is like you have a deep-seated enemy, and its special ability is like you can always ask the GM if your nemesis was behind it, which is hilarious. They are a little EXP intense. I don't know. This is a weird thing, right? Like, a lot of people have noted that, man, there's a lot of EXP costs. I don't know if necessarily, like, all the EXP stuff is balanced how it should be, because it's like, oh, give, like, 1 EXP per hour. For me, in a normal session, that would be, like, 2 a session, which I would not do. I would probably double it to, like, 4, maybe, and then do more for more stuff. So, I don't know. I don't know if FFG is always talking to themselves about how to EXP balance, because, yes, it does seem like getting all the way to, like, level 5 is pretty expensive. And it's noted that the Bond's EXP doesn't go towards a curriculum or title, which kind of makes sense because it's almost like advancing its own separate thing. That I don't know if I'm keen on, but I love the little narrative touches, and I also love the little mechanical touches to this. So I would probably be easier on players setting up bonds anyway. And like I said, you can start a bond for free, and you only need to get the bond to rank 1 to get the bond ability. And then there's a little thing which is called Assembling a Court in 7 Steps, which is basically just how players build a little court scenario. And talks about also how to build motivations for your NPCs and stuff. I'm all sad there's no new NPC templates in here, but there are some new sample NPCs in the front half of the book, a bit like Shadowlands. But yeah, so that's the general thing. The last bit in the court segment is just, okay, here's how you can, if you're going to do a game centered on a court, whether it's a one-shot or a campaign, here's how players can, like, you and the players can get together and set up everything and make sure everybody's invested and interested. And guidelines and stuff. I know some people have also kind of poo-pooed on that, but no. I think that kind of like collaborative get-together stuff is really interesting. I'm probably not going to use it anytime soon, but it could be fun, and it helps people, like, even if you don't literally follow the steps, it helps people understand what all you need to have a good kind of setup. which is important, because that's another thing that happens a lot, is some people are like, how do I do this, or how do I do that, or what's the lore here? Like, instructions on how and why to do stuff is very important. And that's all the 3 segments of the book. So overall, Courts of Stone is really good. I think I like it a bit better than Shadowlands, but I have my own thoughts about the Shadowlands as a place. The crab were fun, but like, the particular nature of the Shadowlands is it is cool to me, but also some of it seems off model. But that's a discussion for a different time. The schools added are very interesting and they're very, very robust. I like that there's a lot more robust technique ads that do interesting things. And I buy PDFs so I can control F them if I need to. Unlike some people who complain about buying all these books. Anyway, overall, I think it's really good. The new gear ads are very, very good at kind of fluffing out little small stuff, but also big stuff, like actually giving you cool shinobi tricks to pull. The fluff sections are, as always, so illustrative and so wonderful. They're such a great read. I love it a lot. And like I said, instantly inspired me. Instantly gave me ideas on stuff to include, whether to literally include a plot hook or a detail, or to just be inspired by it. The GM half is also pretty good. I felt like I didn't focus as hard on that because I kind of know what I'm doing GMing, I think. I still need some more practice with this game, but I kind of figured out what I want out of L5R, so I don't need some of that advice as much. But it's still very helpful to cover, and as always, like, FFG has done their best, even really more so, like, you would think maybe, like, big deals like Star Wars or even 40K, which I went, no, this is, like, the real one that's like, yo, here's how you make players feel comfortable, and here's how you are not a dick to real-life cultures and people. Like, they really get that they're kind of touching on a fine line here with what L5R is, and realize that not only is it good in just a general social sense to be a little bit more respectful, but also you can really, if you're not respectful, you can really make people mad and also come across as a huge dick. So, like, they've basically done as much as they can to be, okay, if you are a dick with this game, it's your fault, not ours. We are including the complete instructions on how not to be a dick in the book, which is great. I respect that a lot. And furthermore, just the general, like, bonds are, I think bonds are really fun. Like, the EXP aspect is a little concerning, but I was also planning on, like, buffing up the amount of EXP given out anyway, because, whatever, advancement. That's just a personal approach to GMing, though, because that's the thing. As the GM, I am God. Everything goes according to my plan all the time, and all objects exist in this universe because I put them there, so, like, yeah, whatever, the players are really strong. Doesn't matter, I'll work around it. You know, you can always throw in another couple of minions. You can always decide that maybe you need to roll a little bit bigger dice pool. Whatever, not a big deal. So I'm probably going to be a little more free with EXP, and I've got some ideas for house rules because I kind of agree with some people that the way, like, titles and curriculum is being completely mutually exclusive, I don't know if I like that. I want to test making them overlap a little, but that's a different topic for a different time. Overall, Courts of Stone, really good. Looking forward to Path of Waves. I don't think I'm going to use any material out of Path of Waves, but I think it's a really good idea. It helps flesh out the Rise from Dust game, which is an option presented in core, but is not super well fleshed out. Like, okay, there's a couple monk schools, which theoretically the Fortunist Monk lets you access certain invocations. Now there's the Mercenary Ninja School, which is really training, I know, but, like, we call it a school because that's the mechanical role it has. But having seen previews of, like, the Highwayman characters and stuff, there's a lot of interesting concepts we're going to hit up in that. So, I'll look forward to that PDF about 1 million years after that book comes out. And after that Germanic pause, which will be edited down anyway. Thanks, Truncate Silence. I figure we'll go ahead and wrap up. I've already jawed your ears off for about an hour. We'll wrap this up. And, you know, hey, if you're interested in any of those topics I alluded to, like I said, it's a really good read on all those areas, so I highly recommend the book. But yeah, we'll just wind down. So I will say, if you are watching this episode on YouTube, give it a like. If you have any comments, leave them in the comment section down below. Or join our Discord, that link is in the description as always. If you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel so you can always get our latest videos. Like I said, I'm going to do an Enter the Dojo on Togashi Monks, and if you don't know what that is, look at my channel. Find out those videos. I talk about L5R schools and kind of compare their fluff and mechanics and stuff. And talk about, you know, what kind of options you can have to still have an on-point build. And even if you're already subscribed, consider that bell for notifications so you always know when we post a new video. And like it says at the front of the show, you can get this episode early on Patreon. It really helps us out. And I do audio releases for some long videos like this. Like this is in raw format over an hour long before it's been edited. So that's the thing. It's like, okay, well, I'm gonna release an audio of this. So for as little as $1 a month, you can get those downloadable. You know, if you're like, oh man, I love your content, but I, don't want to listen to YouTube on my phone in the car or something. You at least with my Wi-Fi or whatever. Or you want to be able to easily come back and forth. Yeah, slip me $1, and you can get the download. And also you can get access to video formats early and lots of other goodies. And like I said before, it really helps us out. Really helps support the channel. But you can also just support us by watching. Alright, that's everything. I will see you in the next video, everybody. Whatever form that takes. Thanks for your time as always. And just remember the rule. One man, one sword, one strike.